Welcome everyone, and welcome back. This is our 5th session. Amazingly, the time is passing really fast. I can't believe we're up to 5 already. So the usual pattern, with your permission, we might just start with some reflecting on the sort of concepts we touched on and I shared after last week, and then come back and we'll look ahead. Before we dive in, are we all on the Jamboard? Yep.
Just opening it up.
Yeah, right. So again, this is our 3rd and last Jamboard. I can see that someone's joined that. That's great. I'll just pop that link into chat just in case. So we'll do some reflecting on that idea about letting go of sharing control. We talked at some length about last week. And then we're going to look forward at something which I think is quite pragmatic, quite practical, and liberating. I have found it. So we'll touch on that as we go. Any questions or anything you'd like to know or cover, or anything else before we dive in? Anything you want us to touch on specifically? Okay. All right. Well, I think as usual then, we might, so I'm looking now at Jamboard at the slide number 2. And as usual, I might pop you into a room together, the 3 of you, and you can just have do some thinking, get our heads back into where we were last week. We talked about sharing control and what it's like. I sent after the session email with a couple of links. One was we had that vulnerability tool, so maybe you can go back to that in the next minute or two if you choose to. And the Bregman video, it doesn't matter if you haven't seen it, but you know, in all of that, there's also Cynefin too. It'd be interesting to get your reflections on that. So casting your mind back onto that material. And just have a little chat as usual. What stands out? How does it make you feel? What feels challenging about that? And then we'll get you back in 5, 6 or 7 minutes and we'll do some debriefing. Make sense? Welcome back. Welcome back. So we're always curious as to what and whether you've had any of those blinding flashes of the obvious, or I'm interested in any. Did you try and think through this thinking over the last few days in your real world? Anything to share there?
Trying to think back to what's happened in the last 7 days. Mm-hmm.
I actually have something that's moving forward. This, what we learnt last week, made me look at a problem we've got that probably is going to need to be solved in the next 12 months. And looking at what had been done with that, and it's quite an intriguing problem in that there is a massive split within the rehabilitation sector. Mm-hmm. There are about 28, 29 groups. And of all of those groups, one of them is 60% of the sector. Mm-hmm. And for a long time, there was a peak body. And then 2012, the player that's 60% of the sector left the peak body. Mm-hmm. So you have this split within the sector. And there's been all kinds of ways to think about bringing it back together again. And, you know, the wildlife rehabilitation sector strategy, which analysed that, states that in order to do it, they're thinking of putting together an advisory board or trying to get WISE and the NWC back together. And I just wondered this past week, based on everything you guys have been teaching us, is that if this is not the ideal thing to say, we're going to facilitate it, we're going to put you all in the room, but you're going to come up with what that body should look like, not us. What do you think? Scary.
Scott or Chris, what do you think?
I don't know. I just, in Shona saying that, I've just realised that I had a similar thing that happened this week. It's a simple question, I guess.
Yeah.
I kind of agree with that approach. I think, us as public servants are here to get outcomes for our communities, and we don't necessarily serve those special interest groups, but obviously they're very important. But I think that kind of approach of saying, well, you're the experts, you're the industry representatives, you tell us what you think is the right way. We'll consider that.
We just adapted over the years. The situation is untenable. And we adapted. We just said, all right, now for everything, we go out to all of them separately. Whereas what we would like as government is one voice, one peak body that we can go to, and they can, but it doesn't happen that way. So, we've got a brand new manager who just asked me, what should we do moving forward? And I suddenly went, oh, hang on a minute. This might actually be a true collaboration here.
So something to think about. Could talk about after we finish today, because the piece we're going to bring next is about how you might try stuff, and so that might give you some clues in terms of moving forward. But I think your point you made about scary. I mean, one of the things about sharing control and vulnerability is it is a bit. And I guess for government, it's challenging because we don't like to be scared or try the scary stuff because we feel like we're losing control. But I think that point about sharing control, having people's fingerprints on what you're doing, more likely to get the ownership and the buy-in, which is what you're after. But of course, it means not knowing what you might get, and that can be a bit challenging. I guess you've got to manage that. I guess one of my questions for you guys is just, is sharing control, vulnerability and saying I don't know hard in government, because it seems it's an anathema to the normal patterns of control, not showing vulnerability, and certainly having to know the answer. So I was interested in, does this fly a bit in the face of the norms, particularly in agencies and government?
I don't think so. And just thinking more about Shona's problem, I actually think the issues you're facing is like competing power dynamics.
That's exactly what it is. It's competing power. And one of them has $100 million after the bushfires. So,
So what's the implication of that, Chris? What is it for?
Well, at the end of the day, they're competing for their members or their organisations, and they need to have the voice of very senior people in order to demonstrate that they're effective to their member groups. So I'd be, getting the minister effectively to facilitate that conversation in a way. but
that's way
really,
above my pay grade.
but I think if you're talking about the influence of $100 million of grant funding and whatever else happens to be, competing against whatever your policy, then the minister needs to take ownership for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the question I was going to pose to Shona and all of you just around that was, what did we do in our first the first episode of this program? Can you cast your mind back and remember what we touched on, what we talked about? What was the focus of that first program?
All the different values.
Yeah, it was. And in the context of doing what together as collaborators?
Getting down to...
Yeah, it was, remember we gave you the tool and it was about co-defining the dilemma.
Yeah.
What's our question?
And that's what I saw myself doing with them.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's what I'm hearing there is, the traditional approach from state government in this context. I've already heard it. We need an advisory committee. Well, if that's the answer, what's the question? And is that everyone's question, or is it just our question? And how would we know? And and power is part of that too. How do we work together given a vast imbalance in power? And one way to approach that, Chris, might be to say, well, I think the answer to that imbalance, at least initially, is to meet it with our power, the minister. But that's one solution. And I wonder if sitting in the dilemma with that group, power is part of the dilemma, funding is part of the dilemma, and allowing solutions to take root and emerge is the different way. That's that sharing and control way, isn't it?
I mean, I certainly have found, I think I was saying this in the breakout room, admitting I don't know has been incredibly easy with the work that I've done in the past, and in fact has been one of my tools that I've used. Having not done this, I didn't realise how clever it was. So now I just give myself a pat on the back. But, I started off, from the very beginning when I did this, basically saying, you guys are the experts. And in that case, I came from the marine world, and most of the work was always terrestrial. So I would say, I'm marine, don't know anything about everything else. So I need you guys to explain it to me. I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, and those questions aren't to put you on a spot. It's because you need to explain it to me so that I can write this, and so that we can get the standards, and we might have to have multiple goes at it because I don't know, and you guys are the experts. And it worked an absolute treat all the way through, because it allowed me to ask a whole lot of questions and really sort of tease out information coming from this, I just really don't know approach. So I've never, ever had a problem with admitting that, I don't know, but that's on smaller projects. I'm not sure if the government would be uncomfortable with that with bigger projects.
Is it about finding aspects of it where you can?
That's what I think it is. I do think it's aspects of it.
I think one of the things about that, ensuring that the positions are able to be held. And if you think the dilemma is, how do we actually work together without losing our power? I mean, making visible that dynamic, because it's real, people know it, but sometimes just admitting it and saying, look, this is about a power differential. It is about maintaining the power in our own constituency, not giving up what matters to our people while working together. So I think part of the vulnerability can be even just sharing what's real by making it a little more real and a bit more visible. So it's a way of actually sharing control without giving up control, if you know what I mean. Sharing a bit of the power by admitting that you're more powerful or less powerful. So I think there's some of the aspects that you could potentially play in that doesn't challenge some of those really strongly held things like, I've got to hold on to my position and I don't want to give up the power, because that'll be hard. You don't want to go straight there. You'll just get pushback.
And is the power also something that's got value to everyone in the whole thing as well? Like if this one group's got the $100 million and no one else has got any money, can they find a way to get that $100 million to work towards the whole solution for everyone, not just that?
That's what they are doing, actually. Yeah. They're sharing the 100 million, but it definitely does put them in a massive position of power.
As one of my clients used to say, I don't understand why they treat us as the big hairy gorilla. And somebody says, well, you are. You're the one that's got all the money. Just admit it and recognise it and own it, rather than sort of avoiding it.
And that allows the conversation and the question and the constant reflection on, given that we've got all the power, or that one of us has all the power, how do we do this in a way that isn't like we're the big gorilla? And it just makes that conversation possible safely.
Because it would appear from what you're saying that if you think about it at the interest and value level, think of the value triangle, that people want the same thing. It's just that they go about it in different ways. You know, their positioning, what they want to happen might look different. But if you're spending the time more in the interest and values, it's likely there's more common ground. So it's working in both spaces, recognising people want to hold the positions, but at the value level, they probably share a whole lot of stuff. People want the same thing, but they just see it through different lenses and they see different pathways. And that's where the agreement might be harder to get.
Makes me think a bit of one of our standard processes we call value management workshop for our projects where we're trying to make a big decision. And our client is normally a person or a small team in the organisation, and sort of develop the project along the lines of thinking that they've got an idea of what they want out of this decision and they're going to get to make it. But then we have this process where everyone goes for a workshop for a day and we talk about values and we don't talk about money, and everyone in theory gets a say. But I guess there's always a couple of people who've got the loudest voice and all that sort of thing. And it's just that, I suppose for me as the PM in that sense, just got to try and find a way to get everyone to get on the same page of vulnerability and I don't know, so that the power people don't just sort of use that forum for themselves and no one else kind of gets a voice.
Yeah, I've sort of been thinking as these discussions are going, thinking about, all those instances, and ultimately, like, all these decisions we're talking about are political. Always, it's, rests with the minister or the government of the day or whatever it happens to be. And all this work could be years and years and years of work and great policy thinking and all the rest of it can go into putting together a policy position, but all of a sudden it can just be whacked in a day. And because, of some other powerful person that didn't felt they were consulted or they didn't like it or whatever it happened to be. So, I mean, that's just, I feel like that's, maybe it's a pessimist in me that's come out today for some reason. But
so what does that mean then, Chris? Well, where does that take you for all this collaboration stuff?
I don't know, because I keep thinking of this great work that was done through planning to reform the planning system recently, and with the recent change in government. All of a sudden the new minister was just said, no, we're not going to do that. So, but it was actually really important work, really important planning reforms, and it's all of a sudden it's just gone, and it's like there's no clear understanding of what's going to happen next. I feel like, probably looking back on that, because we were involved in that work, we weren't leading it, but I felt like perhaps the naysayers weren't properly involved in the initial conversation or throughout the process. So that's probably what led to that outcome.
I think that's always been our argument. So at one level, what you say is always inevitably true, that things can change, and I guess that's always a risk. And I think our argument has always been that the more we do this with, not to, our stakeholders, then at least that's slightly lowering the risk of backflip or back pressure or pushback from those powerful stakeholders that can lead to that. Doesn't eliminate it, I'm sure, but that's perhaps all we can do. All right. Anything else from the conversation you just had together?
Just, Scott, from your viewing of that Bregman video, anything that struck you out of that?
I was just trying to explain it a little bit to Shona and Chris, and we were just talking about the whole thing of using I don't know but still maintaining a level of control. And I think Stuart or John, you asked something about what happens in the public service with letting go of control. I think that's the expectation, is that you've got to maintain some level of control because we've still got the light on the hill that we're aiming for, and we've got a responsibility. But we need to, let ideas in and things. Chris said something which was very true for me, especially in my previous role, that every time something happens at work, there's a lesson is learned, and then the process evolves, and that seems to happen constantly, and we can never really just get good at something and keep doing it. But then that's kind of the trick of project management and government, I guess. So
yeah, that's interesting, because I don't know, again, if any of you watched the Cynefin video, but that's actually, it's very real in that complex realm where you're tackling the complex projects that you do. There is never a right answer, and if we do it here, we can roll that out and repeat that ad nauseum in other contexts. Things change in complex systems, and we do have to keep learning. And
I think it was that one where she said something like, rocket science is straightforward, but parenting isn't.
Yeah, exactly. And planning policy isn't, and koala policy isn't, and et cetera, et cetera. None of that stuff is rocket science. Rocket science is relatively easy. You just need some rocket scientists in the room and they'll build you a rocket. But planning policy, and all that space you work in and that our clients work in, that's genuinely complex. And it does come with all that uncertainty and that exhausting sense of we don't necessarily have the answer.
I do one of those, Stuart. I think it's a bit different to our sort of perhaps our experience of raising a child. It's like an expectation in the policy realm is that we can create, there's some logic to it. And I think what we discover, a bit like raising a child, is there isn't any logic to it. You think there is, but all the best laid plans go out the window the first time it opens its mouth or you pick it up. It just, it changes. And so it's, so I guess recognizing that complexity looks often simple. People say, oh, yeah, that's, I can just work through it. But then it just comes in from left field and you're blown away and you tend to revert back to what you know, which is I've just got to find a process here, rather than experimenting our way forward, which is what we're going to talk about a bit later today.
Yeah, and maybe we should move on, looking at the time. So I'm on Jamboard now, back to slide 3. So just a quick poll, if you like. I'm interested in your responses to these questions. What do we typically do when we're facing complexity? And we've just sort of started to think again about what complexity is. So when facing those complex problems, what do you typically do? What behaviours do you exhibit in terms of approaching a complex problem?
Does somebody have a cockatoo?
Yeah, that's me, sorry.
I just thought I was imagining it there. I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, they've gone past.
Call a meeting. Yeah, I can relate to that.
Oh, I'm not on my Jamboard. Sorry.
There's a link in chat.
Yeah.
There.
Oh, was it? Okay, let me grab it.
Break it down. Yep. Yeah. Gather data about the issues. Yeah, that's good. The stakeholders, what they think.
I'm going to throw one in there that I see happening often.
Yeah, there's a couple there. Yeah. All right. I wonder if one that I might pop one in there. Create a plan for solving. All right, that's good. So there's a bunch of things we might we might typically do. And I guess what we want to draw our attention to today is a good follow on from the conversation we were just having about, all right, remember this is complex. A lot of the situations in which you're working are quite challenging. And I think we want to draw our attention to a different way of working, of collaborating with stakeholders to tackle together complex problems. So, I don't know, John, did you want to talk through any of those, or I'm happy to keep moving? Or
no, I guess that just, yes, lots of unknowns in that complex space. There's probably lots of knowns, but there's probably lots of unknowns. So that strikes me as being, relevant. And certainly the one about looking for answers. There's often a tendency. I see that people come in with, well, I think I know where we should go with this. It's hard not to. It's a bit like the knowing mindset that we talked about with Bregman.
Yeah, and in that same vein, the one about research the issues. So it's if only I do research, I will then know, is some of the behaviour I see. All right, so let's flick forward one slide on the Jamboard to this interesting little picture. Trojan mice versus Trojan horses up in the red box on the top left. So that's what this one pager is called. So again, I'm going to pop you into a room, and rather than talk you through this, I'm just going to invite you to review it, have a look, see what you make of it, talk it over a little bit, and then we'll come back and debrief again, if that's all right. Have you got that?
Jamboard 4, just go and have a look, read through it, talk about it, and we'll come back and debrief on it.
So you should be disappearing. Sure. That was a bit quick, was it?
Yeah.
Sorry, just balancing, but yes.
That's all right.
Yeah. So that tells me if time went quickly, then you must have been having a discussion. So what strikes you from that picture? What stands out?
Yeah, I see this a lot.
You see what a lot, Chris?
The Trojan horse, essentially.
Okay. What do you see?
Because I deal with like an ICT technology, you kind of see it a lot in that space. Like I think a lot more than most other spaces.
I think it's everywhere. The tendency to go for the big shiny project, that the announceable, the policy piece,
The thing is, everyone wants the Trojan horse. Everyone wants the one thing that works, but they just we're really bad at kind of diagnosing problems or diagnosing the issues that contribute to the Trojan horse. So, I think that's where the mice come in, right? Like it's,
You can build a good Trojan horse if you've done all the mice stuff first. And that's the challenge I was just saying to these guys in the workout room. Like for many years, I was in a networking position where it was really hard to show the benefits out of what I was doing. And it was essentially doing a lot of that, little stuff. I might literally have one phone call and there's an outcome from that because you've supported someone and helped them to do something better. But that was not a project. It was not it wasn't, sometimes we documented it, but not always. And it was really, really hard to show the benefit, the cumulative benefit of that in a big sort of shiny outcome. And I guess you go through phases of it. So it was funded for 3 or 4 years and we were allowed to do it for 3 or 4 years. It's been, we're shifting away from that at the moment, and I've lost the argument on trying to point to all the things that came out of that. But, I would make the argument that some of the big shiny projects I've got at the moment have come out of that and wouldn't have happened without it.
So what is it? What's the implication of the fact that everyone wants the big shiny answer? What does that do for our complex policy questions or our challenging projects?
Well, you get one chance at it, and if it doesn't work, stuffed. But you've got to try and build the Trojan horse as though it's made up of the little mice, right? So that little bits of it can fail and the whole horse doesn't fall over.
Okay.
That's the other technique, is to make it look like a Trojan horse when it's actually a whole series of mice.
Nice.
Definitely.
If you said to your boss that, look, we're going to try something, but failure will be inevitable and desirable. I'm interested in a risk-averse environment. How well would that be received?
I have had bosses who've said it's okay to fail. I have had them who say that, but it's one thing to say it. It's another thing to actually,
Yeah, I think it's actually often the barriers are ourselves. To be honest with you, it's like I accept failure in other people, and I accept them learning it, like sharing their experience of failure. Actually, kind of encourage it. I really I value that, but I think it is really hard to to fail, essentially.
We're okay with other people failing. That's all right. But ourselves, it's challenging.
The way I try and look at it is it's iterative. So, okay, there were things about this project that did not work, and I'm going to be really super honest about that with myself, and I'm going to look at it really hard and try and learn out from what it was. But then you try and turn it into success through what you've learned by going into the next project and designing the next project better. So then when you look back at it, it no longer necessarily looks like a failure.
Yeah. If you look on that picture and the 5 mice, obvious, oblique, naive, these are in the blue boxes, conflict, failure. So that last one there, which is what John was just referring to, this guy, Chris Bolton is his name. He goes by the Twitter hashtag What's the Pont. He's Welsh. So what he's saying here is that we deliberately try some things that we expect to fail. So it's slightly more pointy than recognizing that some things we do will fail. He's saying we build failure in. So why would he say that? What's the point of that?
Well, if you identify why it failed, it might solve some other problems that you've got or some other issues that you've got.
What does he mean by designing to fail, though? Does that mean that you already start off knowing that thing already? Like, that wasn't going to work? So
my take on that is that he's suggesting that we're going to try a few things. I don't think this one will work, but I'm going to do it anyway. Right. I think this one won't work. It won't give us the outcome, but I'm going to try it anyway. And one of the reasons, as Shona says, is that I can go back and look at that and say, yes, that failed. And, what does that tell us about our system? How can that inform others? Or I think more importantly, what if it works?
Isn't that a trick to convert the knowing to the I don't know state, perhaps? Like, obviously that's going to fail, so we're not even going to consider it. But let's accept that it fails and we'll consider it and see where we go.
I think it's acknowledging that in the complex space, you actually don't know. And so while you might think, well, I don't think this will work, but I'm actually not really sure. So I'm expecting it to fail based on my logic, but I'm willing to be surprised. It is the source of that unexpected learning. You may learn something that takes you in a new direction from this. But if you never try it, you'll never potentially find that new direction, because if you stay with the knowing, you're likely to keep getting what you know. You need, in the complex space, remember, this is about the complex space, where are those unknowns? And so it's actually, I guess, challenging you about that unknown. And how do you step into that space? And it's hard to out of the knowing space. So
I feel like it almost directs you to unintended consequences. So, and that's almost more valuable than
Yes.
One unintended benefits as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we wouldn't have penicillin if, somebody hadn't said, "Oh, there's a failure. I expected that. Oh, shit, look, there's something there that's growing." I mean, we know that a lot of the successes come from not knowing and unexpected outcomes, which we rarely get from the planned experiment. It tends to come from the unplanned ones.
Yes.
I've got another boring road example because I assume road building is boring to everyone else.
No, it's fascinating. I'm serious. I've done some great projects on roads. Love
on
it.
my project, the scope change I used as an example before is that we sort of realised that in our business case we need to have a do minimum option that costs a whole lot less than what we think the best option is going to cost. And I'm coming together with the team tomorrow to work out what that's going to be. And I'm scared that even though it's like the failure option, I'm afraid that it's going to come out looking good, and we'll end up doing something not so great. But if that is
working in adaptation,
$100 million instead of 400 million, and still, achieve a balance between I reckon what's our triangle of like safety, traffic efficiency, urban design, and then cost is in another shape, then maybe that's okay. So
yeah, that's good. Well, that reminds me, just going back to the picture, Bolton's work, how to spot a Trojan horse in green under the horse, the questions. How many ideas did you test before this one? And road project would be a great example. The bypass is the answer, but did we test X, Y, and Z? And I think what I'm hearing, Scott, is that what you're doing there is in testing some other options and being open to the fact that, we think that this is the answer, but in fact, the answer might be something else.
I think maybe we're evolving a bit to demonstrate in a better way that we've done that testing. Like what I was just saying was in our final business case for this project, which is a bit of paper that I'm working to produce over the next couple of years, is showing the failure option and demonstrating, applying all the metrics to that to see, to hopefully demonstrate how good our preferred option is. But who knows?
Yeah. And look, that to me feels like a really big example of a big potential Trojan horse. I would think that many of the decisions we're making and that we provide answers to, horses, are smaller than that, but this is just as relevant. Have we tested other ideas? And John's a big one for reminding me, I'm hearing just about to say it, that in complexity, we're doing multiple at the same time. So that's the thing about mice. One horse, and it works or it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, we've lost all that investment. But multiple mice at the same time, we can try this, and this, and maybe this, and this one that probably won't work, but we let all the mice run. And from that context, we're going to learn a whole lot about our problem, about our context, about the unintended consequences, and we're going to be much better informed to move forward.
Yeah, I think in that complex space, the tendency to go for one rather than a couple. So it's not the answer, it's answers. And let's test a few answers rather than all our eggs in one basket. That's a subtle but important shift. I think that it actually increases the choice, reduces the risk. So I think you can use those in the arguments for why might we take that path. A bit like you said, Mel, trying a few things and not just concentrating on one. You can still concentrate on the one, okay, do that, but do something else as well. So I think it's an and that I find important in the complex space. It's not an or, it's not a fight over which is the right answer. It's acknowledging, and I think that helps you when you've got a bunch of people all going, I've got the right answer. Good, let's try a few. Actually gives you a bit more space. Yeah, so you avoid that fight over which is the right answer.
It kind of helps me answer a question that I was just going to ask you guys anyway. Like a struggle that probably everyone has is that I can think of a few people in my broader team that that are very rarely willing to go to I don't know, and they've got their expert opinion and what have you. And I just mentioned before that our projects are always a balance between a few key factors. There's the age-old argument between the urban design guy and the road safety guy about my favourite topic, whether you plant things in roundabouts or not. Because, you know, it's very unsafe to send a man in there to whippersnip the roundabout. But then it looks really good, and not everything about what we do is about safety. Otherwise, I feel like saying sometimes to some of these people, well, maybe we should just take all the cars off the road, and that would make it very safe. So,
I like that approach.
Well, sometimes I struggle to kind of get the people that are, you know, got this tunnel vision in their discipline to open up, to get down from their position, I suppose, to have a genuine discussion with the people that are on that other position. And I guess as the PM, I feel like I've got to try and facilitate that, but I always feel like I've got a bit of an opinion as well. So that's like another thing in the mix. I step out of it and try and find ways to get them all to talk.
Yeah. And I think the thing about the mice, this might be where you were starting, Scott, is that you can do yes and.
That's what I mean.
So first roundabout, we'll plant the trees. The second roundabout, we'll do the other thing. It's like, and I think down the bottom it says monitor, analyze, amplify what's working, dampen what's not. So it's actually recognizing, okay, a couple of experiments, let's try both. Let's know in advance, well, if we get more accidents or whatever it is, or we get good comments, it tells us, well, hang on, maybe we do more of that. And it's not about we got it right or wrong. It's more, this seems to be getting us in the right direction. Let's do more. This seems to be taking us away from our light on the hill. Let's do less. So I think it gives you, again, that choice that to try stuff.
Yeah.
Isn't that what you do with your kids as well?
I think it is. Well, it's complex, and so we do have to learn how to
we experiment, don't we? Yeah. What do we try tonight?
But I think lock them under the stairs. But the thing that's just reminded me of is, remember the groan zone. So we diverge, and then ultimately we converge. I think we are over. Our convergence muscles are over practiced. And I think this experimentation stuff is about allowing multiple points of convergence, multiple trials. In fact, to me, it feels like we're constantly sitting in that, not the groan zone, but the learn zone. And we learn not by coming up with an answer too early and saying, this is what we're going to do, but by saying, let's try a couple of things and let's not come to an answer. Let's learn together. And that's a much more healthy approach when you're facing, with multiple stakeholders, you're facing complexity. We don't have to come to closure. We can come to learning. And how do you do that? You set the mice free.
And I think it is still about getting convergence. It's about getting outcomes, but you get multiple outcomes and you're testing the outcomes. So I think it still meets the need to have, we're moving forward, you know, we're making progress, we're doing things. It's not about we're just talking and never converging. So, but the multiple convergences, I think, still meet that need to get outcomes, to get results. So we're heading in the right direction. So it still meets that need, but allows you that flexibility for the mice to run.
I might just share a couple of slides briefly and in a way, these link some of the ideas we've talked about through this whole program to me. So we're over here, pop that onto presentation mode. So you'll remember our light on the hill, which is our shared idea. You know, we've got a dilemma. We're considering together what we're shooting for. And what we're really talking about today is the process of getting from the one to the other, or at least moving in the direction of the light on the hill. And we do that recognizing there are multiple paths, multiple ways that might get there. Obviously, there's some timings on this slide, which is a real bugger, isn't it, when that happens? That's not very useful at all. I don't know what's doing that, but let's go backwards. So what we're talking about here is finding ways that may or may not, and which we believe are likely to take us in the direction we want to go. And we do this with our stakeholders. We do this with, not to, and it's all about learning. And for me, this is one of the most freeing concepts in this whole idea of collaboration on complex issues. It's shifting slightly from we have to answer this to this is really hard, and it's going to take all of us to learn to operate smarter, in this environment. So what does good planning policy look like? What does good koala policy look like? What does good transport thinking look like in this space? And it just allows us to step back a little from arguing about the answers and instead thinking about what can we do today that's going to help us learn and be smarter together. It's going to take us where we think we want to go.
I think the other point about fast steps, it's about lots of small but short initiatives. It's not about 6 months or a year. I mean, that's hardly going to help you learn. It's just the period's too long. So there's something about the nature of doing it fast, getting some results, seeing where you go next, which gives you that momentum, but not relying on one answer that's going to take us a long time to resolve. Now, obviously challenging in some of your situations, but taking that concept in, how can we do stuff regularly through the process rather than relying on one thing done over a long period. A bit like Mel described, lots of little things. You do a phone call, do it, know an answer next week, this week, and then can learn from that.
Yeah, that's right. A phone call is a great example of a scale, a mouse appropriate scale, something I can try today that's going to work. Any other questions or observations just before we move ahead? Any thoughts about that?
I did want to I was thinking, like, a lot of people don't have time as the thing. So I feel like there's like important stakeholders that just have no time to participate, just don't care, or like they should care, but they don't. I don't know. I've really sort of seen the no time thing as really just shut up in the last sort of little while. I don't know if anyone else has experienced that, but yeah.
That's interesting.
Engaging, I think probably allowing enough time to go through that process is always a challenge.
Anyone else have that experience?
I definitely would agree with, like, it feels like there's just been an up in pace on everything, and my diary looks completely insane in a way that it didn't a year or two ago. I do think it is COVID related, because we kind of got into this habit of having back-to-back meetings, which used to try and have a bit of a space in there, but because we're not traveling anywhere. But in starting to go back to it, trying to build that space back in again, I think we just have to accept that we need to make the argument to our seniors that that's going to involve a bit of a loss of productivity for a while we build that space back in, but then it will have a longer term benefit, because the thing I lost out of all of that was thinking time. And what it now happens is that goes into my time, that's where I do it, and it's not good for me health wise. So all of those things are starting to add up, and there's just a real sense of exhaustion through the pandemic, through everyone having all those little pieces of time clipped away, and then, like, I had the reaction the other day, 2 hours. Someone wants me to come to a 2-hour workshop. How can I fit that in? And I just sort of looked at myself and went, oh my God, what has happened to you? 2 hours is not that long, and actually is probably the bare minimum for what you need to really collaborate properly on something. But that was my immediate reaction. And it's just like, I don't know. I've always had this theory that climate change is speeding up everything in the world, including our activity. And I think it's part of what we're seeing. And it comes through directly. We're in this space of urgent response, and, it must be done yesterday. And that would affect all of you guys. Like, the roads, we had a lot of damage. We need the next road in place even faster. In the planning space, we've got a real housing crisis. We've got to have those houses built faster. Everything has to go through processes and approvals and whatever faster. That puts more pressure on our environment, therefore we have to have our policy and our, so there's this sense of, and how do we build back a little bit more, slow in, think, and I think we just have to keep making the case for these more space in our life, more room to collaborate, and try not to fall in the trap ourselves of going 2 hours. You can't have 2 hours of my time. That's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's actually a really good context, Mel, for exactly what we're talking about. We could look for the answer about how we're going to give ourselves more space. Like let's go back to this, or we could look for the mice on how to give ourselves more space, which is, what am I going to do today? What can I do today?
Make a little bit more space.
Give me another 5 minutes, and did that work? So that's the thinking we're talking about here. You can't solve the problem of the world wanting more of you, because it's not within your bailiwick. But and that's typical of all the problems. You can't solve all roads. We can't solve all any of these dilemmas. They're always there. So the mice thing, this is why I find it empowering. It's given that it's complex and probably never going away as a problem. I can either be paralyzed by that and overwhelmed, or I can say, what are the little levers I can pull? What are the mice I can test? Me and my stakeholders, what can we do today, this week? That gives us a little bit more space.
And I think, Mel, just that one about doing it with too. So it's not about you having to solve, how can I give 2 hours to that meeting? It's the person who's after the 2 hours and just working together saying, what can we experiment with here? What's a couple of mice? We could try that meets your needs, meets my needs, and test out whether we can give ourselves some space. So doing it with as well as doing that experiment, I think, is an important piece.
Yeah.
None of which, Chris, resolves the problem of how to do this stuff when there's no time. And as I say, one of the things around which we can experiment is the process stuff. How am I going to work with my stakeholders today, given that everyone's busy? How am I going to communicate with them? It's a good place to be practicing our experimental thinking, I guess.
And one of the things too is, if you start to do this stuff and they come along and it's really different to a way that they've engaged before, they'll come next time. And what we found with some of the workshops we're running recently, we set them at, some of them we even did it an hour, 2 hours. So these are quite large, complex problem workshops. And I was like, 2 hours, we can't do it in 2 hours. That's just going to be crazy. But that was, our partners had said, no, that's all you can have of our staff's time. So you must get it into 2 hours. So we went, okay, we'll go with that. And of course, at the end, they're all asking for more. They're all saying they want more time. And we've got another round. So of course, next time they will now say, yes, please give us, we are willing to give you more of our time. So maybe you use that first engagement point to set up a way of doing things that will help people to go, no, I actually want to be there for the next one.
Yeah. Well, what you're talking about, again, is a good example of commit to collaboration. And it's what we said and have said all the way along. We can't expect people just to jump in, boots and all. It's the different experience which builds our commitment to the fact that, we probably do need to work together on this. Because we, as consultants, we have the same discussions with clients all the time. We can't have that much time, or we don't have that much time, or they won't have that much time. When you hear, I haven't got that much time, what are you really being told by people?
It's not a high priority.
Yeah.
It's less about time and more about, this doesn't feel like a priority for me. And so
it's not going to help me get the outcome. As you have the experience that it helps you get the outcome, people might make more time available for it, or outcomes.
So I think you're dead right. The different experience is what makes builds that commitment. All right then, let's come back to the Jamboard. I'm just cognizant of the time here. And one of the things, just taking this experimental thinking down to a sort of practical, doable level, we have found that just a little tool to work on together can help me and my team, my stakeholders, come to grips with what are we trying to do here. We talk about experimenting, but what is it? And so we use a little template here. It invites us to record our light on the hill. What are we trying to do around this situation? And what's the hypothesis? So if we've got a mouse, this is really where we're describing the mouse. What is the hypothesis? What's the thing we're about to try? And then we describe it in a bit of detail. So, well, we're going to do this, this, and this. The safe to fail thing is really important. If this doesn't work, I guess what do you think safe to fail means? What does it mean to you? Anyone? What does safe to fail mean?
I think permission to fail.
Yeah.
It sounds a bit like permission to use work time to develop, as opposed to using every minute towards the knowing solution.
Mm-hmm.
Like what we're just talking about, being really busy and all that sort of thing, like, kind of how to give yourself time to do safe to fail, unless you kind of get directed to make time to do that. Like, that's actually a priority.
I wonder if a better word there is safe to learn. Fail seems a bit cruel. It's a risk analysis, and maybe it's more about your own confidence. I'm confident I can try this because it's not going to kill us in the end.
And I think it's very rare that it's a fail, not fail.
No.
Like fail pass.
No.
Like that's,
Yeah.
I couldn't even really name a project really that I'd say was either way, either was absolutely brilliant, killed everything that it needed to do, versus was a complete failure. Like, they just don't really exist.
Yeah.
So it's more about freedom. Yeah. Like you say, freedom to learn from what didn't work out, what parts of that project didn't work.
Yes.
Yeah. Setting learning objectives as part of it. Is important. I've done that for a pilot project recently, and made it really clear that it's about learning. It's about understanding, what might be possible.
Yeah, and I think all of that is absolutely true. And there's also another angle to safe to fail, which is, if I'm going to try something, am I confident that if it doesn't work, it won't break the whole system? Am I going to break this whole project if this doesn't go as I plan? And safe to fail is a scoping around that, to say, if it doesn't work, then that will be safe. It's not going to kill us all. So testing whether it's the quickest way to get to the ground out of an aeroplane is to jump without a parachute. That's not a safe to fail experiment, because if it doesn't work as you plan, it won't end well. So we don't want that. We want to be safe to fail or safe to learn. We don't want to be taking risks with our project or with our work. Does that make sense? Yeah. Where were we? So back to the template. This safe to fail step there is just an opportunity to reflect on that. Am I about to press the big red button which is going to kill us, or not? Or is this mouse a safe mouse? Is it safe to let this mouse run, if you like? And what would I expect to see out of that?
I think the expected outcomes is really important to think about in advance, because knowing what you're looking for is important, because you just go into it and say whatever comes out is okay. What you're saying is, if I'm seeing these type of things, that's heading me towards the light in the hill, so I'll do more of it. If I'm seeing these type of things, it's not. So thinking through what the outcomes, how will I know whether to do more or less of this? It's important before you start, because if you don't do that, you'll never know. What am I expecting? So thinking that through, I think, is a pretty important part of that. What are the outcomes that will tell us if this is moving us in the right direction or not?
Yeah. And again, all of this is through the we lens. So it's what are we expecting? what are we expecting with this experiment, with this experiment, with this experiment, and how will we know? So it's, again, sitting in that learning space together. That's how collaborators roll. We learn, into these complex realms. Any questions on that? I mean, there's a lot to. This is quite deep stuff. But any questions just at this stage? All right, let's have a crack at this. We will send you some templates and some. I'll send you this document so you've got it. But what I'd like to do is, just moving on to slide 6 there on our Jamboard, just an opportunity to think this through. What might application of this experimental concept look like? And what feels challenging about that in my world. But I'd really like you here, just on a sticky note, to identify, a mouse that you might try, or multiple mice in your project, in your world. They could be little process mice, they could be little content answer mice. What could it be? What would be an example of something you can try? That's all we're looking for here, and there's no wrong answer to this. And drop your sticky note there. I might just get rid of that one. Do you want to go back into the room together, or are you happy just to do that here?
Happy here, I think. Ready?
Yep.
Have a little think and see what this feels like to actually try and do.
If you need a hand, reach out. Please get down that Gala or maybe Debbie Chase.
Is this something we're wanting to do or something we are doing?
Could be either, I guess.
Either. Okay.
I'll have that chat. Are we on 6? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Oh, is it 6 or 5?
Well, we're reflecting on
5.
We're just on 6.
Oh, okay. I'm on the wrong one.
Yeah, me too.
Sorry.
Really just talking about application of that idea to your own situation. What might you try? What have you tried? What do you think you can try? That might be a bit different to that one solution.
What are some little things I might do? That's good, Scott, to use that list of the sorts of mice on the one pager. Oblique in your case.
Yeah, I was just trying to think about that in terms of with our road projects, as we've noted, it's always about building a road.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the team I'm in now, where we're developing the plan and making the early decisions, I've got the opportunity to maybe try and throw out some different ideas that we don't normally do, and maybe we can actually do something that is still good but not the standard thing. Like, we still have to do all the core standard things, but maybe we can build off-road mountain bike path as part of the land that we destroy to build the project or something.
Yeah, nice.
So if that's the challenge, anxiety about delivering under tight timelines, no time to experiment, what's a way of tackling that potentially? No time to experiment.
Well, I guess you. I'm struggling to tell the difference between a mouse that is designed to fail or a mouse that's I don't know. I guess you just build in the release of lots of mice into the whole way that the project has to be run. So that's the way you do it, you know.
I'll give you an example of a mouse that has always stuck with me. It's a real example, and you'll see it in the documents that I send you. I was working in a large council with a big division of different parts that weren't working well together, and this part of the division wasn't working well with this part, and I was in helping them collaborate. And we got to this point. What can we do? What can we try? And we're actually trying hard to develop some ideas that they could test together to help them work better together. And there were quite a number of people in the room, 40 people, and they're all professionals, but the one bloke in the room who was in the high vis, he was the outdoor team member. I think he was a safety guy, actually. And in some ways, the least likely, perhaps, just his whole demeanor and his whole energy to come up with that sort of professional solution to the professional problem. He came up with the experiment that why don't we just next week all get together and have lunch together next Thursday. And that was his
complete
experiment.
Change of
his hypothesis was that if we eat together, we'll build our relationships. If we build our relationships, we'll be able to work better together. And they did. And I was actually up there and I sat at the table with them, and you could just see it. There was something happening there which looked like the parts of the business getting to know each other a bit better. And it was a tiny little experiment. It was very easy to run. And it was very safe to fail. If it didn't work, you could just not do it again, or you could tweak it. So that's the sort of scale that's
little
in the
things.
mouse.
Yeah.
Small, easily done. It took no time. And it was worth a shot. And I think they built it in thereafter. They dialed it up. Let's do it more often. So think that scale when you're applying this thinking, and you should be able to free yourself up, even in a constrained world. Mice are tiny, but they can go anywhere.
Yeah, they can go into spaces and create space where there is none.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think your example there, Scott, just of that different views on, say, safety versus visual versus something else. Opportunity just to try those little experiments in small parts of the work, quick to do, get results relatively quickly, and then ramp it up. You learn something from it. Amp it up if it's working, getting you in the direction you want to, stop doing it and do something else. I think the key is to think about stop what's not working, start amplify what is, try something different if it's not. It moves you away from that one solution and all eggs in one basket to more, we're trying stuff, we're moving on that picture Stuart showed from the complex issue through to the light on the hill. Experimenting our way forward, or planning our way forward, you can call it, but the planning's a little different to the traditional.
Yeah, I like to say learning our way forward.
Learning our way forward.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to jump out. I've got another meeting that's starting. Speaking of time pressure.
Mel, if you can just try and apply that thinking to something and bring it back to next week.
I will do my best. Okay.
Right, thanks, Mel.
Catch you later.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we best let you go, folks, given the time. And I was just going to slide 7 on Jamboard. See if you can take this thinking. I'll send you the template that might help you think it through. You might be able to do that with a partner, a colleague, some teammates or your stakeholders. And again, we haven't got, I think we haven't been doing the LinkedIn, and that's fine. So don't distract yourself with that at this point. Just try and apply the thinking and come back next week for our last session.
Hey, Stuart, I was going to ask, can you put the LinkedIn link again? I just was looking for it earlier. I know you sent it in an email, but for some reason I couldn't find it, which sounds like a bad excuse, but
no,
it's easy to chuck that in the email. I'll go and have a browse.
Sure. Okay, will do.
Thank you.
All right, any questions? All right, thank you very much, folks, for your time, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.